One of the hearts of this church is to help those who come figure out how to have spiritual conversations with those that they come in contact with. And I'd like to share a little bit about that this afternoon, and then also help you understand why it's important to get your testimony dialed in. And then maybe we'll have a little chance to work on that just a little bit as well. One of the things that I've observed over the past year, and Ken Pretty, who I've worked with, has really brought this to my attention. He does an excellent job of this. When we talk about going and making disciples, oftentimes that is the only thing that we hear. And we think, oh my gosh, I've got to go do that. Of course, that's our responsibility. But then there are times that when we look at that, I'm like, I get a little scared, I get a little gun shy, don't know what to say, don't know how to say it, don't know what to do. Or you just feel inadequate and you kind of stumble, and then your confidence gets down, you just kind of blow it off, and it's just one of those things you just kind of push aside. And one of the things that we teach pastors and churches to teach their leaders and their folks is that is not necessarily the case. Because if you look at Matthew 28, 19 and 20, one of the things that Jesus says is that all authority has been given to me under heaven and earth. And now he tells us to go and make disciples. And when we include that in that part of the story, now we realize that this is really a co-mission. We're under Jesus' authority, and he's telling us to do something. He's commanding us to do something. And if we're underneath of this authority and we understand who he is, that ought to give us a great deal of peace and a great deal of comfort. That if he's telling us to do something and it's under his authority and under his purview, what's the worst that's really going to happen? And I understand persecution and all that, but when you look at it, he's the creator of the universe. He is the Word. He's all-knowing, all-seeing, all-loving, all-just, all-merciful, all-gracious, all grace, all truth, all wisdom, all. And he's been given that authority by his Father, and then he commissions that authority with us. The second part of that is the other part of the sandwich at the very end, when he says, I am going to be with you till the end of the age. And so now he's present with us, and we're working underneath this authority. As I like to tongue-in-cheek say, what could go wrong? I mean, if he's got us covered from above, and he's with us wherever we go until the end of the age, and our charge is to go and make disciples, then what's the problem? And of course, we know what the problem is. But I say that in context of hoping to open our eyes and our hearts in such a way to realize that it's not about us and doing this. It's about Jesus comforting us by telling us that he's got all authority and he's going to be present. We find this same type of pattern way back in the Old Testament. If you remember the story of Joshua, there's 5 or 6 different occasions when God tells Joshua, go and be very courageous. But before that, he pumps Joshua up a little bit. He says, I'm going to be with you. He says that I'm never going to abandon you and I'm never going to forsake you. So that ought to give you the confidence then to be bold and strong and do as I am commanding you to do. Walk across that river and go take that land. I know those guys are bigger and stronger than you guys are. I know they've got more or better military capability. I know that they have greater numbers, but I've gone before you. And it's the same pattern that we find in the New Testament, Jesus. And so if we could keep that in the forefront of our minds when we begin to have spiritual conversations with people, I hope that will decrease the anxiety level by about 100-fold. And just realize that this may be one of those God-appointed times. Remember, Jesus is present. The Holy Spirit is dwelling in us. The Holy Spirit knows what's going on as much as Jesus does. And he might have you for this place and this time to have this conversation with this person. He has set it up on a team. All we have to do is walk into it and deliver it. And that's where we get nervous. And that's when we go, yeah, I'm not quite sure. You know, all these doubts and all this stuff. And we have to, for me, I have to realize at times that God is not a God of confusion. He's a God of order. He's not a God of doubt. He's a God of confidence. So what's messing with me? Either my own story of my own past and the way that I fumbled and bumbled and had awkward conversations and things haven't gone well, and I don't want to do that again. Or it could be truly some sort of spiritual warfare where Satan is just like, okay, I know the buttons that I can push with David right here, right now, in order for him to walk away. And so I'm going to start dialing that in just a little bit. I'm going to turn up the heat a little bit so he moves away, because I know that if he has this conversation with this person, that's one less person in my kingdom and one more person in my adversary's kingdom. So there could be two things working there. So just keep that in mind as we have this conversation. And if you have any questions at any time, please, ask. I'm happy to see if I can answer any of them. So when it comes to spiritual conversations, since now we've set the table, we get a lot of questions a lot of times. Well, then how do you exactly have a spiritual conversation? And the first step is to listen.
Really?
Yeah, listen. Because if you have an agenda, typically it doesn't work. There's also a pattern in the New Testament, particularly with Paul. In his missionary journeys, you find him a lot just gathering information before he says anything. And he's listening, he's watching, he's observing, he's gathering data so he knows exactly is probably too strong a term. He knows the direction in which the conversation should go, should it present itself. Okay? And so listen, it's just normal conversation. We do this anyway, don't we? When we're in a conversation over dinner, we listen to people. So this is nothing earth-shattering.
I think also that, in the coffee shops, we're noticing, where the person's from, kind of what their niche is, what's different about the coffee shop. When we're in the community, we're always looking for something to bring up in the conversation.
Yeah. Well, that's part of that observation, where you're just simply observing what's going on, and you might overhear something. There's all sorts of factors in this, but the point is you're really just being quiet and you're listening and observing, and even if it's with a good friend you've known for years, they're not a Christian and they're might be struggling with something. Of course, that's a time to see if you can have that type of conversation. So there's several pointers that we have identified that we have found to be people have found to be very, very helpful. First, is there a crisis? That's an obvious one, right? Is there something going on in that person's life that they're really worried, they're depressed, they're full of fear, they're anxious? Is there something going on in their lives? The second, and this takes a bit more skill, but I think that all of us do this anyway. Discern the mood of the conversation. And I think we do this over dinner time when we're at somebody's house. You can kind of get a feel for what's going on. So make sure to pay attention to that. Their emotion is often a window into their pain and their underlying state of mind. And Molly, this is what you do. This is, and this is what Jesus did so well. If we go back and we look at all of the times that Jesus had direct encounters with individuals in one-on-one, he did this extraordinarily well. Now, of course, he has an advantage over us. He knew what was going on in that person's mind, even before they knew it, right? But these people still reveal to us what's going on. And so we need to pay attention to that and realize that and figure out a way to connect it. The next thing that we have found is when you're having a conversation with someone, is there a challenge that can't be overcome? Is there something in their life that's going on? And I hear this with a lot of students down at ASU when I've been with them, and they, I don't know. It could be something really trivial, right? Like I've got a test, so I'm not quite sure how I'm going to overcome this. Or I've got a paper I've got to write in the next 12 hours, and I'm behind, right? Or it could be something, a little more over the hump with some really deep life issues. Maybe with their parents or with a boyfriend or a girlfriend but it's just something that they just can't figure out. And they're really at their wit's end, and now they're sharing it with someone. And so just be aware of that. My phone keeps turning off. The fourth thing is, are they searching for answers to larger questions? Are they searching for questions or answers to larger questions? Is there a comfort that they're seeking? Another one is something that we hear a lot is, I just don't know what to do. Or and when someone says something like that, if you have just a bit of a relationship with them, a great way to segue into a conversation, spiritual conversation is, you know what, I may not know what to do either, but I do know that God hears our prayers. Can we pray? And that's a really natural segue. And I have yet to have anyone, hundreds of people I've talked to, ever turn down a prayer. And I say, well, there might be one or two, but most people are like, yeah, sure. Right. And then you pray, and then that's where you can maybe ask another question. Do you have a background in faith? And begin to figure out where they're coming from and a little bit about their worldview. And they will reveal to you at that time, if they feel comfortable with you, a lot about their upbringing, a lot about their state of mind. And my hope is you'll be able to start to make some connections between all of that and start seeing some holes and how Jesus might be able to heal this part of them, or the gospel might really apply to that part, or how the Holy Spirit can, do some work over here, or maybe the truth of the word may help them over there. There's all sorts of ways there's all sorts of tools that we have in our toolbox if we're good listeners and we're able to ask the right questions.
What if they've been hurt by the church?
That's a great question. So does anybody have an answer to that? What if they've been hurt by the church?
Well, it goes back to what you started with, listening. Because I remember one night when Gail and I were attending an atheist church for a while for fun events. And then we went out to dinner with some of these folks, a bunch of the folks after church one night. And they found out we were Christians, and like, what are you guys doing here? We're just here to hang out.
Check this place out. It's got
so
an oxymoron. An atheist church.
And
So many people ask us that.
And so many of the folks that were there were actually atheists because they'd been hurt by the church.
Okay.
So we spent most of the evening listening to their stories, and then they wanted to hear our story. We just shared what we'd been through. It wasn't thou shalt become a Christian, it says, in John 3:16, blah, blah, blah. It was connected in Christ's heart, so that they were very eager to talk. And from what I heard, a number of those folks have actually heard through channels, and a number of those folks there actually either went back to Christianity or became Christians eventually, not necessarily through us, but through other experiences. So it starts again with what you were saying. Listening, try to hear the story.
Good.
You know what helped me with that, or has helped me, way back, post Billy Graham counseling days, there was a thing, I'm sure it was nationwide, you probably weren't born yet. It was called I Found It. Big billboards, I found it. You're like, what is, and I'll never forget sitting in a group. I was at ASU at the time, so that was in the 70s, late 70s. And they're like, yeah, what's that billboard? What's that mean? Oh, it's a religion. I said, no, it's not a religion. It's not a relationship. And when I have myself felt hurt by the church, I have to realize it's not the church. And that I have a relationship that supersedes all the idiots in my mind. I mean, you shouldn't speak badly of people that think that they're following God's command, pastors and whatnot, but it's a relationship.
I think that is the bad thing, and I think it's been going on for a long time now. It's just that in today's media and all that other stuff, I think it's more prevalent, because when somebody says, I've been hurt by the church, what does that mean? I mean, I suppose the Catholic Church is considered an entity in itself, so I suppose I understand that. But like, somebody that leaves a congregational church, like ours, downtown Phoenix, you guys leave, I've been hurt by the church, meaning us. Well, that's not really the church. I mean, in the way that, biblically speaking, that's not the church. That you were hurt by a group of Christians, and Christians, that does happen. See, the other thing too is, and speaking with students, again, some of them that I've talked to, they've had bad experiences with Christians. Okay, Christians are people. They're capable, they're human. I mean, Jim, I'm sure that there are a lot of people that were having all kinds of problems with the guy on the street corner over there. You see what I'm saying?
He's talking about the street preachers.
If that is the example, if that's what they're saying is the church, then somehow I have to explain to them, well, that's not really the church. So if you get hurt by a group of people representing, saying that they're Christians, that's fine, but that doesn't represent all Christians. If you were hurt by one church, i.e. downtown Phoenix Church, the church didn't hurt you, that particular organization did, the people that did.
One of the things that I when I come across people who say that they've been hurt by the church, I can honestly say there are those people out there, but if the church was actually following after God, Christ would be in that, and they would not do that.
Right.
Christ and the church don't always equate 100%.
Right.
So.
Yeah, to build on that, it seems from our experience, because we've been through a lot of the church hurt stuff in a way, and I think in most every case, it's the leadership, not the body. What's sad though, is because the church is taking on kind of a corporate or cultic kind of mentality, is that if you've left, if you're not attending that building anymore, then you are no longer part of the church as defined by that building. We've actually been told that. We try to maintain relationships, and they say, well, you're not coming here anymore, so go away. And they're like, wait a minute, we're all in God's church, not this building church. And that's where it really gets messed up.
I'll definitely agree with what you guys are saying. I will caution though to someone who's been hurt by the church personally to assume that they have the responsibility to distinguish between, being hurt by the church or, we represent the church. And so when they're hurt by us, they're hurt by the church. And so that's at least the feeling of that person. And so, not to dwell on that too much, but, really, listening, like you said, and finding a way to acknowledge, whatever their pain is, whether we agree with it or not, is real. Aligning with that, if we don't necessarily feel the same way, being able to actually, find a connection that if we were in their place at their time, in their faith, place right there that we would feel probably the same way, and being able to have a deeper conversation of asking questions, and then being able to actually have an answer as to why, you know, as to why the rest of it is actually different than what their experience was. We'll actually take that person to exactly what you're saying, which is spot on, you know, helping them get to the realization that, oh my gosh, I found someone that is different. And that's exactly what Jim had done, you know, and what Greg had done with me at first was listen, you know, acknowledge that pain, align with it, and then really just kind of be able to assure that, you know, that there is an answer different than what I've experienced.
And it's so sad to see people that just, you know, kind of, and we hear about it all the time, Jim, and you and I talked about a couple. I mean, you know, to me, that breaks my heart to hear that somebody, you know, they're so hurt to the point that, you know what, that it really affects their lives. And you know what, for Carlene and I, and I'm not gonna lie, I mean, there's some things that have happened in the last couple of years. You know, in our place of fellowship, we love the people there, certainly. We love, you know, all of that. But what we're realizing is that, you know what, like to your comment, leadership is generally the people that we find a problem with.
Yeah.
But you know what, the thing is, to me, I can now kind of look beyond that and say, okay, well, that's fine. The leadership, I don't agree with 100%, but that's okay. God allows them to be there. But you know what? It's the fellowship. You guys, you know what? You know, Kathy, all those others that we've been around for 30 some odd years. That's our church. And other people will hurt us. And someday even some of our best friends hurt us. But you know what? But we can't just say, well, you know, they hurt us, so you know what, Christians are all bad. You know, that's a huge jump. And it's up to us, I think, Rob, and what you were saying, is that, you know, we need to be the one that shows that grace and love to say, hey, I realize you were hurt here, but I want to tell you that that's not the way all Christians are.
Absolutely.
And then I think that's when it's going to get them to the point of being able to heal and being able to see it. Because you know what, if I act like a jerk, just like all the others, then I validated your conclusion.
And only one or two people
Yeah.
made the huge difference as to then, you know, anybody that comes into this church from here on out, you know, or me walking into a church, like an actual place of, you know, as defined by church, I don't necessarily have that same assumption anymore. And so, you know, I agree.
And to build on what you guys were just saying, using family as an example, you know, I've got a bunch of sisters, none of whom are Christians, and they're all very dynamic. So our relationship is constantly flux. And we get nailed at times when, if there's a disagreement, well, you're the Christians, you're the marriage communicators, you should know better type of thing. It's like, there's no magic thing here. And it's having been through those ups and downs, and we were kind of in a down one a couple of weeks ago. And at first we want to lash out, but no, we took a different tack, and it's, no, I'm going to love them instead. I wrote out nice cards, thanking you for what they've been doing recently, following up, praying for them, and taking myself out of the equation. And that has helped a huge amount. And keep having to think about that is, you know, if there's a wrong, it's usually two people involved. And if one person makes a positive step, then hopefully there's healing. Forgiveness, or repentance and forgiveness.
In a rare moment, I'm gonna give him the gold star. Because he started off with listening, empathizing, and getting yourself out of the middle.
Mm-hmm.
That, if you just want to say it succinctly, that's what we're talking about in this situation. That's what David, I think, was talking about too, is the fact that you can come up with great arguments. And if you're like me, you're looking for those opportunities. You use that really special, that zinger that everybody will be impressed with and think, that's a smart person, as opposed to just being a good listener. And you're not going to have all the answers. But empathy goes such a long ways in our evangelism. And that's the reason why originally, first century, people weren't called Christians. Jesus didn't say, I need for you to bring people to become Christians. They were called Christians because they were acting like little Christs. They identified that you go out at night and the babies that had been laid on the side of the road to die because we didn't get what we wanted, that happened in that first century. those people would go out, people at the church, people that follow Christ would go out at night and take those babies in and adopt them. They were doing things that nobody was used to. And so they said they are Christians because they act different.
I think the less we could say, better off we'd be. Just have action instead of words in a lot of cases.
One other thing I've used in my toolbox when somebody has said that, and as a pastor, that's probably one of the top 5 questions that I've ever dealt with, right? I can't tell you how many de-churched people I've come across. I mean, incredible amount. And one of the tools I use is exactly, empathize or listen, empathize, connect. And depending on how the situation goes, I have found it to be an open opportunity to bring up sin. And in that we are all, whether we're Christian or not, we're all sinners. We're all still going to make mistakes. And those mistakes, when you get imperfect people in a relationship together, you said something bad's going to happen at some point. It's just the way that it is. And so then the important things and how do you respond to that? And then that's how I'm able to go into my story. And I'll talk about that here in a minute. And to show them that there is another way, maybe a better way to be able to handle situations like that. And I've yet to have a person turn away and say that's a bunch of garbage. Oftentimes it's really thought provoking, and whether or not I don't know what they do with it, but I can tell that it provokes some thought and it jars them just a little bit and think, okay, wait a second. Maybe I'm being a little too jaded about this. Maybe I need to soften my approach because I didn't realize what, again, that's that truth that's speaking into the situation. You have to do it in a way that is gentle and inappropriate for that time. Anything else on that before I move to the next question?
No,
Okay. If you're struggling with something, and who doesn't on a regular basis, and you're in a conversation with someone, and again, this is someone that you might know a little bit better. And then this would be like like I would ask one of my friends, like, man, I'm really struggling with X, Y, and Z. I really need God's help here. Have you ever been in my situation? And yes, I have. How did you handle it? Where did you go to find your strength or your wisdom or, I would hear, how'd that work out for you? Well, but I came up a little short here. And now they're telling their story. And now you're listening and you're gathering data, right? So that you can pull out a tool in your toolbox to maybe say something that is wise, say something that's comforting, maybe, hey, I'm sorry that happened to you. Can we pray? Right? I mean, there's something there that advances the conversation. And it is I have found that when I'm able to do that, and I haven't done it, maybe 20 times, 25 times with something like this. I have found that after that conversation, that takes the relationship to a whole new level of trust and a whole new level of openness to where now they can feel like they can share things, deep personal things that are going on in their life. And many of those relationships have gone deeper and have been very, very rewarding for me and very fruitful in conversations about real stuff. And I feel like I can have a real conversation with them about Jesus then, and not feel, I just feel like just have a really real conversation because we're at that level now, if that makes sense.
One of the things that I was thinking about just a moment ago is there's this television commercial, and I don't know what channel it's on or when it started, but there's a young man who says, I deal with depression. And you would be amazed at how many people give me answers that are not helpful. And, oh, you'll get over it. You just have to think positive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that I will always remember is Jim's example of your friend doesn't have the money to pay his electric bill. It's in the middle of June, July here in Phoenix. He has no electricity, therefore he has no AC. You know, I could go on ahead and I could look at him and say, well, if you'd have paid the bill, or all you gotta do is, no, the thing I need to do is I can sit with him in a hot apartment, not say anything, just sit with him because I care and I don't want him to sit in a hot apartment by himself. Therefore, in talking with people who have been hurt by the church or who have other issues, it's not up to me to look at these people and go, well, all you need to do is this. I'm not called to do that. I'm called to sometimes sit with them and say nothing.
It takes some wisdom and discernment to figure that out. A lot of times. And it takes some experience and experience of hard knocks sometimes to realize that. I'll never forget in my first counseling class in seminary, the professor was sharing the time that he was in I don't know, is it an internship or what is it where they do their hours? Practicum or something like that. And they had just gotten out of a counseling session and it was the last one of the night. And there was only two cars in the parking lot. It was his car and this person, his client. And the client walks out and 10 minutes before, or he walks out 10 minutes after the client left. And the client hasn't left the parking lot. And was just sitting in the car. And he walks up and he knocks on the window. It's February in Chicago. So knocks on the window and she rolls it down and says, "Are you okay?" And she got tears and tears and tears and tears streaming down. And he said, "Would you like for me to sit with you?" And she nodded, unlocked the door. And he said he sat there for 45 minutes and not a word was said as she was weeping. And then all the tears were gone. And he said, "Are you okay?" She nodded her head. And he let himself out of the car and went home. And that was it. And the next time that they met, she said that was one of the most powerful moments of her life. When nobody was trying to fix her. And she was being allowed to have the space to be able to grieve all the stuff that she was grieving. And to have someone sitting there and not judging and not trying to fix it.
Validating their pain.
Yeah. And that obviously 20 years later, that left a deep impression upon me. That oftentimes that's the best thing to do and it's the most powerful thing to do. Molly, you probably speak to that. I mean, that's.
Well, actually, in obstetrics, the role of doula came out of a study. Asked Tiffany about it, Dr. Klaus and Dr. Kennel. They were doing a study and an individual was assigned to actually just go into a laboring mother's room and sit, do nothing for a period of time. And then they would get like feedback from the laboring mothers. And the majority of all the laboring mothers said, that person that came in the room was so helpful. That person that came in the room did nothing. They just came in the room and sat and let that laboring mother do whatever she needed to do. It just sat there. And it was that physical presence of somebody allowing them to do whatever they needed to do. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems crazy, but
Yeah.
it's the importance of humanness.
that was kind of the way, Jim, you were talking about, Mary's brother-in-law that you sat with, basically hospice. And you know what, and quite frankly, both Carly and I experienced it with our mom this past spring. I mean, we knew she probably barely knew us if we were there. And my natural self would say, well, I don't know why I need to be there. I mean, I don't even know whether she knows that I'm there. I can't communicate with her. But you know what the thing is, in thinking back, I think that when we were there, she knew. And that's all, that's all we were expected to do. And you know what, most of us, especially me, I feel like I'm one of those guys, you hear a problem, when you see somebody, you want to do something about it.
Right.
And sometimes it's just sit there and be quiet. And that's hard for a lot of us to do.
Or sticking by them in one way. I know that in several instances now with some of the couples we've worked with, and they have either said to us or said out in public, what really impressed them about knowing us was that we didn't run away. We hung in there with them at times when they were ready to give up, or sometimes when we were ready to give up. But that hanging in there, being there, is a powerful piece.
So then that leads us to our testimonies. I would encourage you, if you haven't already, write down your story and then edit it down to 1 page, 8.5 by 11 page. Handwrite it. Don't type it out. Handwrite it out. And what you're looking for in your story is, just your life. You might not necessarily have to go, well, I was born here, I went to school here, But that could be kind of the chronological way. You could go about it in a way of describing your family. Yeah, I grew up in a family like this, and my mom and dad were like this, and my brothers and sisters were like this, and this is kind of the expectation of the house, and these are the rules that we had to follow, and and this is how it kind of played out in my life. And then here's where I met Jesus. Or if you had known Jesus, since you were this tall, you could still say that, I can't remember a time that I didn't have Jesus in my life. And here's how it played out in my life. But then when I went off to college, here was my first serious struggle, or my first serious challenge. When I got out of the house, here was the first crisis of faith I had. Yeah. First crisis of faith, first questions I had, and I didn't know how to handle it. And I really struggled. And I went to this and this and this and this and asked, whatever that is. But it's really important as you write your story to be able to identify places in your life where you have struggled, places in your life where you have crisis, whether that's a crisis of faith or a crisis like some sort of existential crisis, or some sort of deep emotional scar, a relationship failure, perhaps perhaps there were some more traumatic things that have happened in your life. Perhaps there were moments in your life that other people wouldn't see as very profound, but for you were incredibly profound. But the reason why I'm pushing this is because if you get that on a piece of paper and you begin to edit it down and you begin to really find out your story, the next part then is, okay, then how did Jesus meet me in that place? And it could be, gosh, I had a crisis of faith for 10 years. And I was lost. I didn't know. And, I thought Jesus had left, or I thought that, whatever it is, right? Or I didn't know God existed. I knew he existed, and all of a sudden I had this happen, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And in my world, that told me that I was doing something wrong, because all of a sudden it seemed like God had just disappeared, or he was punishing me because of this, and this, and this, and this. And man, I really struggled. My faith really tanked, and I really didn't know what to do or where to go. And then I found I had a conversation with someone, or I read something, or whatever that turning point was for you to realize, hey, wait a second, knucklehead. You know, as I've gone through my desert, like the Israelites went through their 40 years, God had a plan, and there was something there that God was working out in me, in my character, so that I could become the person I am today. Something along those lines, right? And then this is how he has then healed that situation. This is how he has rectified that situation, reconciled that situation. Here's how I look at it now, as you know, as before. And now, rather than looking back at that circumstance with sadness, I look at it with joy. Rather than looking at it as a grievance, I see it as a comfort. Rather than looking at it as a chaos, now I find peace. Right? And you're just contrasting the pain and struggle before with the Christ-likeness that we have in us today. And granted, there may be still some things that we're still working through, and that's fine. But I have discovered, and we have discovered in the work with all these churches and all these pastors, that when people are approach spiritual conversations and they've got their story down, now they can begin to connect with people in ways that you never thought you could connect before. And you don't have to connect to everyone because you don't have everyone's story. You have your story. You have your unique set of circumstances. Everyone has those universal emotions, right? So we can connect somewhat there. But boy, you can really connect. So in my story, I wasn't a Christian until I was 29. And that's usually where I start my story. I said, you're not gonna believe what happened. This is who I was. At age 29, I was doing this and this and this and this and this and this. And then all of a sudden, as I was going down the freeway at 130 miles an hour, I hit that bridge column. And just like a Lego car, when you crash it against the wall and everything falls apart, that's what happened to my life. And here's what, I lost my job. The gal that I was engaged with decided to break off the engagement, and the house we were living in at the time, we were renting because they had it for sale and they needed someone there to showcase it. And they let me know that I had 30 days to move out, and right? And I didn't know where else to go because I had tried everything. I was the leader in the clubhouse when it came to the power of positive thinking, and all of those self-help books. I could tell you all of those that I've read, but that didn't touch this pain. I couldn't overcome this with the power of positive thinking. I needed something deeper. I needed something to heal my aching heart, and that was power of positive thinking was going to make that happen. And that's when I met Jesus. And here's the work that he did. People are like, whoa, right? But that story isn't going to connect with everyone. But man, the story that it's connected with, I can't believe the number of people that it's connected with. And it's usually people who are like me in corporate and scaling up the corporate ladder, and all of a sudden the floor drops out. I'm like, man, that's my story. Yeah. So now we're buds. And now occasionally they'll come back and they'll say, okay, so how did you handle this situation? And what did you do here? And tell me about that God thing again. And how did he help you there? Well, this is, and then that's the question. So I tell them, I said, so how's God working in your life? I'm like, I have no idea. So I think he is. Can we explore that just a minute? Yeah. And so I asked some questions, and I think he might, you might want to look over here because I think he's working here and here and here. Right? So not all is lost. Maybe you just have to look behind the curtain and see who's there. And a lot of people have been encouraged by that. And do people immediately, those who are not Christian, immediately trust Christ? I have yet to have one person immediately trust Christ because I've had this conversation with. In fact, I've only had 3 people in my entire life when I've had a one-off conversation where they have trusted Jesus right then and there. And I take great comfort in the fact, as Paul writes to the Corinthians, that I get these two confused. Is it Paul who plants or Apollos who plants? One of them plants, the other one waters, and then God's the one that grows, right? And that's that. I take great comfort in that because I played my part. That was a God-ordained conversation, as I spoke with before, under the authority of Jesus. Jesus is present with me. He's brought me to this point to have this conversation with Rob or with Kurt or with Jim or whoever. And I was able to connect in a deep, meaningful way, share my story, hear where they're coming from, and then connect, hopefully, and share a little bit of my story. So perhaps there's a connection. And then leave it at that. And give them my number and say, hey, listen, I'm up for coffee anytime. You know, if you come across this stumbling block or that stumbling block, you just give me a call or email me. I'm happy to have a conversation with you. And I've had, gosh, I can't tell you how many conversations that I've just continued to have over the years.
Transparency.
I might have 30 or 40 ongoing conversations right now with people. And these conversations can last. There's one guy that I've been having a conversation with for almost 20 years. And I'm okay with that. Okay. Because God in his timing is going to bring him to that moment of confrontation. I call it confrontation. He's got you painted in the corner. Are you going to choose me, or are you just going to continue to rebel and fight against me? Okay, you're going to fight against me? Okay. I'm going to leave you in the corner. Just wear yourself out. And when you wear yourself out, you'll come to me, right? And you know, he's at the point where he hasn't worn himself out. Okay. That's not in my hands. It's not in my control. I'm just here to listen and support and love and share. And we've had some pointed conversations. And there are times you might have to have those. And that's okay. I just wouldn't suggest having a pointed conversation in your first conversation. So could we get a commitment from you guys to write down your story if you haven't already? And the next time we get together, we can take a look at them and work through them a little bit. If that's
Tell you what I've been thinking.
Yeah.
Next week, we're going to meet, I believe it's Valley Coffee, which is just over here next to our building. It's brand new. We've never been in it, but it is the old T-Espresso, the corner. Okay, that's now Valley Coffee. And I'm suggesting that we just break up in groups of 4 at a table, 4, 4, 4, however it goes, and bounce your stories off of each other.
great idea.
We'll spend some time together and learn from each other. And in groups of 4, we can talk in there. The acoustics aren't very good, so if you talk too loud, it's just too hard, too much bounce. But sit in 4 and talk across the table to each other about your story.
That's one thing that I'm glad. You know, it's funny. How long have we been meeting? I mean, you know, obviously most of us know each other well, but you know what? What is your story? How did you come to know the Lord? You know what? In other words, I mean, back in the day when we were young, it's your testimony. You know, that's what it is. It's your story, and everyone's unique. And I'd like to hear Kurt's and Rob's, and well, I've heard a little bit about yours, you know, and everybody else. And as well, Jim and I have probably known each other now, for almost 40 years. And I, you know, as an adult, I know what he's doing, but I don't know. Were you a little kid once?
Yeah.
See, I've never heard that part of it, you know, and so, you know, and the thing is that everybody's is unique, and you know what, sometimes we try to, you get a bunch of Christians together, they try to outdo one another, right? You know, see, God did this for me, and God saved me from this, all that, and you know what, sometimes it's just like, you know what, my life is, I'm just saved. Just
Get a bunch
save
of
me
preachers
from
at the
You
conference.
just said something I wanted to ask Dave about. So God did this for me. I think you were alluding to maybe principles, transformational principles. I mean, the whole purpose of our story, God working us, is to change.
Right.
And I think most testimonies I've heard don't really talk about that. They stop right where you're saying, God did something for me.
Yeah.
oh, what's next? What
Yeah,
happened?
yeah. So that's the power of, and that's why I'd like for us to work on these, because a lot of Christian, I've heard a lot of testimonies of, well, they're great historical accounts of a person's life. And you get a lot of great information, but oftentimes they stop short of that contrast. You know, like I remember prior to a Christian, if the situation that I'm in right now, I would be freaking out. And I would be frantic and I would be nervous as all get out. And I wouldn't know how to handle it. And I would be like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And 20 years later, in God working in me in the way that he has, and the way that he has brought me and our family to this point, in knowing that he's always provided, he's always been there, he's always been present, he's always been this, he's always been that. So this is just the next thing that he's going to provide, that he's going to be present in, that he's going to be this, and he's going to be that. And when I shared that, that's the transformation that really piques people's interests. They're like, wait a second, because I want that, because I've got those things. But my pain and my suffering and all of that, my circumstances are going to really resonate with a group of people. Your circumstances are going to resonate. Your story may be equally as fabulous as everybody else's, but when it really grabs somebody, it's going to grab them because it resonates with them in a way that mine might not, or Kurt's might not. And that's the power of the church. When we talk about the church as a whole, and you talk about the body working together and everybody having different gifts and different experiences, just think that if we get the church together and begin to do this and add a few here and add a few there, just imagine the reach that we would have in this community as we were sharing, because everybody's story is different. Rob's going to attract a different group of guys and gals than I am. Jim is, and all of a sudden, we're connecting people to us and then to a larger body who's full of grace and mercy and truth, all at the same time, in an environment that's safe. And, oh, wow, I was hurt by the church. Man, I've been here like 10 times and I don't get that vibe like I get in other churches. This might be the real deal here, or a real ordeal.
Or something that I can actually, that would help me.
Yeah,
Good for me.
yeah, exactly.
Well, sometimes I think, again, like I say, when we talk about our testimony, sometimes we're just kind of referring to that moment, the
Yep.
salvation
Yep.
testimony.
Yep.
But the thing is, our story, as we call it, continues.
Yep.
And obviously, somebody that is our age versus somebody who's like your age, our stories are so different, right? Because there's an age difference and all that. And sometimes our testimony, our story, it's a little bit different depending upon who that audience is.
Absolutely. And then that's the beauty of the church working together. And, there's a lot of churches that aspire to this idyllic notion of being multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multi-this, multi-that. And it's one of those deals like you put a laser pointer on the wall and you have the cat chase it. That's kind of how that looks, right? As they try to figure out how to make that happen. The only way that I know that makes sense historically, when you look back at the earliest of church in the Roman Empire, and the way that they were one by one, was Jim had alluded to earlier, just the act of mercy is going up, picking up kids. It didn't matter if it was you guys' age that was doing that, or Molly's age, or 15-year-olds that were doing that. It was like, oh, wow. Look at this body of people who care, who are doing things differently. And wow, I know he came from a Jewish background and he came from some background in Corinth, and this guy came from someplace in Turkey, and this guy speaks Egyptian, and they're all hanging out together and they're all saving babies. What's that about? And they like each other when they get around each other. Wow, right? So that, to me, I mean, if that's important, one of the only ways that I know how to make that happen.
One of the other things too is that considering the fact that we are all human, and I've never really cared for that phrase, I'm just a sinner saved by grace, because that seems to come across as an excuse sometimes. But in reality, we are still living in a fallen world. And one of the things I think that I hope makes a good impression on the world is that when you and I have a problem, or when somebody else in the church and I have a problem, we have a blow up, we have a miscommunication, we have something that happens. And if the Lord points it out to me, you know what, Gail, you screwed up. You need to go fix this. I need to make sure that I go to that person and I say, you know what, I screwed up. I said something wrong. I did something wrong. Can you forgive me? I'm sorry. And if I have that capability with people within the church, then I think that makes a good impression on people that are not in the church. But then I've also come across people that I have that aren't saved, and I've blown up and I've done really stupid things. And I've looked at these people a few minutes later and I went, you know what? I'm a Christian and I should not have said or done whatever it was I did. I'm really sorry. And I've had people look at me like, like I just grew another head. And knowing that Christians are not perfect, we do make mistakes, we do things that are ridiculous. But if I'm willing to be humble enough to look at these people and say, you know what, I messed up, then they know that they don't have to be perfect to be a part of the church.
It's also,
That's important to the testimony. Sorry, go ahead.
it's also, our stories can be complex as to who plays into that story. And Jim, feel free to jump in on what I'm about to tell. Is in May, I preached a sermon at a church in Chicago, which was basically our 40-year story. And the topic really was discipleship in marriage. But there were a lot of components to that. And key spiritual events in that 40-year story illuminated that topic. Jim played part of that. And when he heard it, he learned that he played a part that he didn't even realize. You want to say something, right?
Well, yeah, he did a recording of it, and so I got a chance to listen to it. I don't remember the exact part that
It was the GCU class that was teaching.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
right. When I was teaching adjunct at Grand Canyon for one of the classes, I had asked Bob to come in because it's always good to have a different voice come in and tell their own story. And these are guys that are in worship, so I asked Bob to come in because he's done so much in the installation part of it. And to talk about it, he was a little bit reluctant because he just wasn't sure that he had anything to say. But I knew he did. I knew his experiences would speak for themselves, and it was good for the class. And I thought it would also be good for you as a chance just to articulate some of those things that you had dealt with, but you didn't want to do it. And that's take it from there. What's the next part?
Well, it was at a low part of life, and because of his encouragement and the fact that it turned out not to be talking about technology, as it were, but more about relationships and worship. And it helped build me back up, and at the end of the class, both classes I taught 2 in succession, and Jim says to me,
Did great.
well, he said more than that. He said, I saw something I never saw before. There were no electronic devices out.
Right.
And I didn't know what that really meant. He says, well, normally people have got their phones out.
Most of the students would always pull out their phones or their computers and they'd start buying shoes or whatever.
So after I bought a pair of shoes, I asked him, so why do you think that is? And he said, you reached and touched their hearts. So it wasn't, the idea was to go and teach a class, but God did a bunch of other cool things. as part of that.
See, Bob really thinks that that was me, but it's really not. I'm serious. That's the Holy Spirit. That's how God uses you when you can get out of the way. And I didn't go in there with an agenda thinking this is what's going to be good for Bob. I'm gonna help Bob. That was not my calling. That wasn't what I was thinking at the time. But it helped you, and I didn't know you were at a low point, but God did. And so He used that as secondaries. I'm thinking, I want this class to learn something about the people that are behind the scenes that very rarely, it's usually the people that are up on the platform that everybody knows, and they're not well aware of all the technology that's going on in the background for people that are making it happen, that are at the back of the house.
So that was my
That's it.
little piece.